There is an old, unspoken truth buried deep within the bureaucratic machinery of any massive organization. The loudest men rarely hold the actual power. The men with the brass pins, the booming voices, and the corner offices operate under the delusion that they are the architects of their domain. But they are entirely dependent on the invisible hands that manage their paper. In an era before hard drives and cloud storage, existence itself was defined by manila folders, carbon copies, and ink signatures. If your paperwork vanished, you ceased to exist. Your achievements, your rank, your future, all of it could be erased by a single disgruntled ghost in the machine. This is the story of a man who understood that power perfectly and the tyrant who learned it the hard way. Central Texas in the early 1980s was a sprawling, sun-baked purgatory. The air at the military installation hung thick and heavy, smelling of diesel exhaust, hot asphalt, and the microscopic yellow dust of the ash juniper tree. The locals called it mountain cedar, but to specialist Vance Abernathy, it was an airborne toxin. When the wind swept across the dry plains, the pollen count spiked, and Vance's immune system declared absolute war on his own body. His eyes would swell into raw, weeping slits, his throat closing until drawing breath sounded like crushing dry leaves. The post-medical officers took one look at Vance's swollen, hive-covered face during a field exercise and immediately stamped his medical records with a permanent physical profile. He was strictly confined to indoor duty. No motor pools, no land navigation, no outdoor formations. It was a humiliating hand to be dealt for a capable soldier, but Vance swallowed his pride and took over the company orderly room as the unit clerk. He traded his rifle for an IBM Selectric typewriter, drowning in the endless ocean of leave forms, duty rosters, and personnel records. Unfortunately, his commanding officer viewed this medical restriction as a personal insult. Captain Croft was a West Point graduate who possessed the rigid, terrifying posture of a man who slept at attention. Croft was a hyper-warrior, a man who viewed the military not as a profession, but as a holy crusade where any display of physical weakness was a moral failing. He wore uniforms so heavily starched they looked capable of standing upright on their own, and he carried a swagger stick that he habitually tapped against the side of his leg. To Croft, a soldier confined to desk duty because of a weed allergy was a parasite stealing oxygen from real infantrymen. Worse still, in Croft's eyes, Vance was married. His wife Corinne was heavily pregnant with their first child. Croft despised family men. He openly mocked the concept of a work-life balance, frequently stating that if the army wanted you to have a family, they would have issued you one. Croft never missed an opportunity to remind Vance of his perceived inferiority. The captain would stride into the orderly room, his boots cracking against the linoleum, and deliberately knock stacks of freshly sorted paperwork to the floor. "Oops," Croft would sneer, his eyes flat and cold. "Sorry, Abernathy, I suppose a draft must have blown through. Good thing you're in here, safe from the terrifying pollen, ready to pick it up." The humiliation was rarely private. During morning formations, while Vance stood near the back, the only soldier not wearing field gear, Croft would use him as a prop for his motivational speeches. Pacing in front of the ranks, Croft would gesture vaguely toward the orderly room. "We train to bleed, gentlemen. We do not hide behind a typewriter because our eyes get a little itchy. We leave the sniveling to the clerks. We are warriors." First Sergeant Orson Griggs, a grizzled, quiet man with 3 tours in Vietnam under his belt, recognized Vance's immense value. Behind closed doors, Griggs relied entirely on Vance to keep the company from collapsing under the weight of its own administrative incompetence. But Griggs was old school. He would never publicly contradict a commissioned officer. He could only offer Vance an apologetic grimace and a quiet word of encouragement near the coffee pot. "Just keep your head down, Vance," Griggs murmured one afternoon, watching Croft peel out of the parking lot in his pristine convertible. "He's gunning for Major. He needs this command to look flawless. You do your time, you get your honorable discharge, and you go home to Corinne." But keeping his head down became impossible when Croft decided to escalate his cruelty. Knowing Corinne was entering her 3rd trimester and suffering from severe morning sickness, Croft began calling Vance's off-post apartment at 6 in the morning on Sundays. The phone would scream into the quiet bedroom, waking Corinne, who would immediately rush to the bathroom to retch. Vance would answer, his knuckles white around the heavy plastic receiver. "Abernathy," Croft's voice would bark, crisp and completely devoid of empathy. "I need the quarterly training schedules retyped. The margins on page 4 are unacceptable." "Sir, it's Sunday. The schedules aren't due at battalion until Thursday." Did I ask for a calendar reading specialist? Get in uniform, be at your desk in 30 minutes or I'll have you charged with insubordination. For months, Vance endured the psychological grinding. He absorbed the insults, the stolen weekends, the sneering comments about his manhood and his impending fatherhood. He absorbed it because he had a countdown. His separation orders had finally been approved. In a matter of weeks, he would be a civilian, far away from the stifling Texas heat and the tyrannical grip of Captain Sterling Croft. When Croft saw the approved separation orders, his jaw tightened. He despised losing a punching bag, especially one who was escaping his authority unpunished. But Croft had his own reasons to celebrate. Whispers around the battalion headquarters confirmed that Croft's ruthless management style had paid off. He had just received tentative orders for a highly coveted assignment at the Pentagon, a golden ticket that guaranteed his oak leaf as a major and set him on the fast track to a general's stars. During Vance's final week, Croft held a command and staff meeting in the orderly room. Surrounded by lieutenants and senior non-commissioned officers, Croft leaned against Vance's desk, deliberately resting his coffee mug directly on a stack of Vance's outgoing mail. "Gentlemen, as you know, Specialist Abernathy is abandoning ship next week," Croft announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "Heading out to the civilian world where he can hide from shrubbery in peace. Let's hope the corporate world is gentle on his delicate constitution. Let us also be thankful that the men replacing him understand the true meaning of sacrifice." Vance sat entirely still. He didn't flush. He didn't break eye contact. He simply stared at the wet ring of coffee soaking into the manila envelopes. In that exact moment, the final vestige of his military discipline evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. Croft was a man built entirely of paper accolades. His pristine evaluations, his commendations, his security clearances, they all lived in a single, thick, heavy-duty folder locked inside the company's reinforced filing cabinet. A cabinet Vance possessed the only master key to, save for the first sergeant. The universe, in its infinite irony, provided the perfect tactical window. 2 days before Vance's final outprocessing date, the entire company deployed to the field for a grueling 14-day combat exercise. The barracks emptied. The motor pool fell silent. Croft, eager to impress the battalion commander, led his troops into the scrub-brush wilderness, leaving behind only a skeleton crew of 3 injured privates to mow the lawns and Vance to man the phones. At 9 o'clock on his final night in uniform, Vance sat alone in the orderly room. The only sound was the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant, rhythmic chirping of Texas cicadas. He walked over to the towering green steel filing cabinets. He inserted the small brass key. The lock disengaged with a heavy, satisfying clack. Vance pulled the drawer open and walked his fingers over the meticulously alphabetized tabs until he reached Croft, Sterling M. He hauled the file out. It was nearly 2 inches thick, heavy with the accumulated weight of a decade of ruthless ambition. Officer evaluation reports, promotion boards, medical records, security clearance adjudications, airborne school certificates, letters of commendation. The physical manifestation of Captain Croft's entire existence. In the pre-digital 1980s, there was no central database backup. If this file vanished, Croft was a bureaucratic ghost. To reconstruct it would require months of agonizing correspondence with the National Archives in St. Louis, requesting microfiche copies that often took half a year to locate. Without this file, Croft could not transfer. He could not promote, he could not execute his golden orders to the Pentagon. Vance carried the file to his desk. He didn't just throw it in the trash, that would be too easy to find. Instead, he opened the folder and methodically divided the captain's career into 6 equal stacks. He loaded a fresh ribbon into his IBM Selectric. The heavy metal ball spun and struck the paper with violent, percussive snaps. He typed out 6 different mailing labels, utilizing the massive global directory of Army post office boxes he kept on his desk. He didn't send them to normal places. He sent the first stack of officer evaluations to a mess hall supply clerk stationed at Thule Air Base in the frozen wasteland of Greenland. He sent the security clearances to a motor pool sergeant at Camp Casey in South Korea. The medical records went to a laundry facility in West Germany. The commendations were shipped to a naval detachment on the tiny, isolated atoll of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Vance slipped the partitioned stacks into 6 heavy brown Department of Defense mailing envelopes. He sealed them tightly, affixing the proper postage from the company's supply. He knew exactly what would happen. In 3 to 4 weeks, a confused male clerk in a freezing bunker in Greenland would open an envelope, find a random captain's evaluation reports, scratch his head, and toss them into a dusty wire basket labeled unknown/return to sender, where they would sit until the end of time. Vance dropped the 6 envelopes into the outgoing mail sack. He locked the empty filing cabinet, wiped down his desk, left his unit keys on First Sergeant Griggs's chair, and walked out into the warm Texas night. He breathed in the cedar-scented air. For the first time in 2 years, his lungs felt completely clear. 4 months later, Vance was sitting in his living room in Ohio, a civilian, bouncing his newborn daughter Linnea on his knee. Corrine handed him a letter that had arrived in the afternoon post. The return address belonged to Sergeant Delmer Rooney, an old poker buddy from the unit who worked in the battalion personnel office. Vance broke the seal and unfolded the cheap, lined paper. He read the messy handwriting, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. According to Delmer, the fallout had been biblical. When the unit returned from the field, Croft had immediately marched into the orderly room, demanding his personnel file to finalize his transfer to the Pentagon. The new clerk, a terrified 19-year-old private, had searched the cabinet. Then he searched it again. Then First Sergeant Griggs had searched it. When they informed Croft that his file was simply gone, the captain had gone completely, utterly ballistic. Delmer wrote that Croft had thrown a metal chair through the orderly room window, screaming that he was being sabotaged. The military police were called, an investigation was launched, but there was zero evidence of theft, no forced entry, no shredded paper in the dumpsters. The file had simply evaporated into the humid Texas air. Because the Army bureaucracy is a merciless, unthinking machine, it did not care about Croft's ambitions. Without his 201 file, his transfer orders to the Pentagon were immediately revoked and given to a rival officer. His promotion to major was suspended indefinitely pending a manual reconstruction of his records. Croft was unceremoniously reassigned to a dead-end logistics posting in the middle of nowhere, forced to spend his days begging the archives in St. Louis to mail him blurry microfiche copies of his past. Delmer concluded the letter by saying Croft's pristine uniforms now looked a little less starched, his swagger completely broken by the grinding wheels of the very administrative machine he had mocked. True power does not reside in the volume of your voice or the brass on your collar. It resides in the quiet, methodical hands of the people who manage the mundane details of your life. The clerks, the assistants, the invisible gears of the machine. Treat them with cruelty and they will not fight you with raised fists or shouting matches. They will simply unspool the thread of your existence, box it up, and mail it to Greenland. If you enjoyed this story of quiet, devastating revenge, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment down below telling us about a time you saw a petty tyrant get exactly what they deserved, and stick around for more stories where the underdog always gets the last word.